Well, thank you everyone for being here. So this paper is looking at misallocation across gender. Just for background, there's a lot of work looking at misallocation at the micro level, specifically looking at various distortions or frictions that affect firms differently. And it's showing that it can account for low productivity, especially in poor countries. And there's a lot of evidence across sectors as well. I think less explored is looking at the type of firms that face this misallocation. And so the angle I'm taking in this paper is looking at gender. So the question is, does the extent of misallocation differ across the business owner? Or to ask it differently, do female business owners face higher distortions to operating a business than a male business? And is this in any way related to economic development? So the way I'm going to do it is just measure distortions as deviation from optimal marginal products. This is essentially the Restuccia-Rogerson, Sciaclino type frameworks for measuring distortions. All I'm doing is just looking at the gender side. I'm going to look at formal firms and a fixed set of producers. So not looking at any selection effects here. And by formal firms, I think it's useful here because if you think women face barriers to enter in the labor market, I'm looking at formal firms here, so women who have already overcome some of these barriers. The data is from the World Bank enterprise surveys. I'm looking at the manufacturing sector, and I'm looking at defining gender here based on the top manager. And results would also hold if I were to look at business owner. It's just the sample's a bit smaller.
So Ashantha, are you moving slides, or we're just seeing your first slide?
Oh, you're not seeing this?
We're not. I'm only seeing your first slide.
Yeah, nothing is moving.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Your screen. Are we moving now? Okay. So I'm somewhere here. I'm going to look at top managers in the formal sector. And the analysis is done at the country level, but I'm going to present everything at a subcontinent level just to provide a snapshot of what's going on. So here's some descriptive statistics. There are 3 points I'd highlight. One is there aren't many female businesses to begin with. And then they also account for a small share of the market. Now, I should say, even in the US, women account for less than 20% of all businesses. So in poorer countries, tends to be a bit smaller. Looking at distortions, that you can look at output and capital distortions. I will focus on TFPR. This is average, the average distortion. You can think of it as a composite of capital and output distortions. The main point here is in South America, based on this TFPR, women face higher distortions. And the same holds in South Asia. In Eastern Europe, it's the opposite. So the next thing I want to look at is to ask, do females in these countries, do they face higher distortions because of their gender, or is it due to these other observables? And so here I'm controlling for establishment size and other factors, as well as industry controls. This is at the two-digit level. What I see is in South America, women face higher distortions, but it's not tied to gender. Whereas in South Asia, it appears that women face higher distortions. The positive coefficient here is meaning women face higher distortions than relative to males. And then if you look at Eastern Europe, it's the opposite. Males are facing higher distortions. Here I'm plotting the female estimate based on that regression from before. The left-hand panel is just including all the estimate based on all establishments. And here it appears that it's negatively correlated with GDP, which is to say female establishments in poor countries face higher distortions. And then the right-hand side panel is looking at the estimate where I'm only looking at small establishments. This is basically trying to link the top manager to the final decision maker at a business. And again, it's negatively related to development. The last thing is I just look at what happens if there's an efficient distribution, and specifically assume women face the same distribution of distortions as men. And here, just the main point is women should account for a larger share of the market. And this is keeping selection fixed. So along with just making these three main points, I see there's considerable differences in misallocation by gender. It's coming from capital to a large extent. There's some evidence of bias against females, and this is negatively related to development. And then if there was an efficient allocation, this female market share should rise. And it's proportionally large because women account for a small share of the market to begin with. And probably an understatement because I'm not accounting for entry.
Okay. Can we go ahead and ask questions now? Or
yeah, yes.
Yeah, on that picture where you show the distortions versus GDP per capita. So towards the high income, you have several, like you have there countries like Tunisia, Turkey, Malaysia, MBS is Malaysia, could be. So these are Muslim countries where I think to be a female manager, you have to be pretty tough and good. So there might be some selection there. In general, there might be selection here along several dimensions, but I guess there for Turkey, Tunisia, and Malaysia, I would worry about that in particular.
Yeah. So one of the things that what this is also showing, and I don't have a great explanation for, is the female estimate tends to be negative for the relatively richer countries, which means that men are facing higher distortions than females. And so the way I'm interpreting that is that it seems like in poorer countries, the entry barriers tend to be much larger for women, so that you have to be a lot more productive to become a manager. Whereas in Eastern Europe, so I take your point for the more Islamic countries, but in Eastern European countries, when I look at that, the distribution of productivity across gender isn't as stark as it is, say, when you're looking at, say, India or Bangladesh.
Thanks.
Ashantha, if I can just jump in. I think one question I was wondering is just on the World Bank enterprise surveys and how the coverage, like what time periods do you use? And the coverage is significantly improved over the last many years. But I was just wondering whether some of this is also just driven by the fact that the World Bank really poorly samples firms in, say, for example, low-income countries versus high-income countries, and whether that's driving some of these results. And the second thing I was wondering is how much of this, I mean, this graph looks like a cross-sectional relationship, and I was wondering whether this is also, it also holds within the panel, for example, like as Turkey gets richer, these things come down as opposed to just like Turkey is in a cross-section that in that sense. Thanks.
Yeah, fair question. Yeah, I'm using, I think 2008 to 2017 in that range, and I'm taking the most recent year for each country. I haven't looked at the panel component, whether as countries become richer, do these distortions kind of go away. One of the things for anyone who has used these surveys is there's just not many observations, especially when you try to dissect by industry, and then I'm trying to do the gender thing as well. So like for I think India has the most number of female observations, but once you clean the data, you're talking about 200 observations.
Can I jump in?
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you for your presentation and the topic. I just have a question about how you explain what you find that female entrepreneurs are facing higher distortions, because the source of distortion in my knowledge from the literature are almost always related to regulation, taxes, and credit market constraints, and maybe to labor market frictions. But none of these, I don't have sense that there is like a discrimination against women if there is a requirement if the regulation is such that it is harder to create business, for example, there is no disposition in the text, in my knowledge, that is targeting women especially. And how do you interpret this result you are finding, or how do you explain that relationship with the gender of the owner of the business?
Okay, so if I've understood the question correctly, these distortions I'm picking up, which I'm measuring by TFBR, is picking up, I would say, like a host of distortions, right? So it's not identifying what distortion I'm looking at. It's just kind of a metric or a composite of capital distortions and output distortions. So this would include labor market issues. This would include access to capital. If I can show this, what I saw is, what I see is the biggest difference that tends to be from capital. Women face higher capital distortions relative to men. And so this, what are the sources? It could be from limited access to finance, those kind of things. But in this paper, I'm not really able to say what is the exact factor that's driving it.
I mean, one factor, just following on this, one factor could be a woman might have worse information, because they don't have the as extended network as men. So then you can imagine when they make decisions on capital, and they make this decision with less precise or less worse information than men. So that could be one, because men. There are many other, let's say, managers, they go and drink together and they share information, whereas men might not be part of that kind of information sharing. So they might have a little bit worse information on the market conditions, on things, and but of course that, maybe if you control for the share of women managers, etc., maybe that would be one way to address this concern. But information could be another, not just distortions, but information, because that will also show as a residual in the Shi-Klinov framework. So if you don't have the same information set, yeah.
Yes, yeah. One of the things that I'm finding kind of surprising, it's kind of a related paper where I'm actually looking at the selection side of this as well, and looking at these entry barriers as well as these distortions. And what's surprising is, like, when you do these counterfactuals where suppose women face the same entry barriers as men, but they still face the same distortions that women typically would face, so higher distortions. I'm finding that just the distortions alone, that women face higher frictions, still account for a lot of productivity losses. So it's like, even if you got rid of these selection effects, these differential distortions, like you say, like the networking effects, seem to matter a lot.
All right, thank you, everyone. We have a 5-minute break now, and then the next discussion will be held at 15:15. So thank you very much, Ashantha. And,
Thanks, Ashantha. Very nice.